was described, my name's Chip DeGrace, and I appreciate this invitation for sure, to talk to you guys this morning about the communities that I serve. I'm a designer by birth, an interior designer by degree, and an enterprise-wide designer by practice. And when I say a designer by birth, I mean, it doesn't mean I was, rearranging the furniture in my mother's house as a kid, but I was a dreamer and a sketcher, and I've always believed that there's always a better way to do things. I'm the director of Design Purpose, which is a weird title, but I'm kind of a weird guy, and maybe through the course of this conversation, you'll understand why that title makes sense. I believe most of our intentional actions as humans and as design practitioners are in fact design. I'm from this small town, way up in Michigan. I'm a Midwesterner. Believe it or not, I love snow. And as you can tell by all the blue areas up here, I also love water. We live on the Leelanau Peninsula. It's just a tiny little finger of land with tons of water around it. And we are here by choice. I'm a Chicagoan by birth. We just dig this area of the country, and so my practice and my life really is anchored in this place. And so when I go about my daily design activities, this is the ecosystem that I first think about, where I live and the community around it. This is a part of my immediate community as well. I'm married. I have 3 sons. The oldest is a set of twins. One is an architect. His twin is going to go to law school soon to be an environmental law student. And the third is in school to be a landscape architect. My wife and I are both designers, and over family meals, we've explained how everybody's responsible for designing a livable future. And having taught these guys, the best we could, now they're teaching us. And their favorite response to us, of course, is, not enough, not fast enough. They really are good designers, and they can sell a big idea pretty effectively. The youngest on the far right is probably the most skilled, and having watched me as long as he has as much as he has watched me, he's listened. And so, for example, it wasn't long after his 2 brothers went to college, he came to me and said, "Hey, I'd like to, maybe take the car that we all shared and, turn it in for something else, get a different car." And I said, what are you thinking? He said, "Well, I'd like something more appropriate for me." And I said, "Well, what do you have in mind?" And he said, "Well, something that treats carbon more respectfully." Come on, how are you gonna say no to a kid like that? Anyway, if you guys access media at all, it probably feels somewhat comprehensively our better days are behind us. And but the truth is that the problems we face are problems of success. We've designed solutions for poverty, education, healthcare that have broadly brought a greater percentage of the global population to a better life. And not to be Pollyanna here, but one of our greatest challenges is still the inequity between those and those who have not, no doubt. The human species, though, has inadvertently redesigned the balance of all natural systems and have put itself and the fate of many other species on a path to extinction. And there's no doubt we have to redesign now with urgency and with scale, which is why we're here. And to consider a more holistic way of working, I'd like you to consider what I say to you today. And you don't have to agree. I just want you to consider it. Because business and our practices and their agencies are able to restore, I believe, a more restorative future. And secondarily, we all could be more popular for it. So, that might happen. And I'll give you a case study to think about. Look, it's impossible to do our challenging work without rigorously describing the problem that we're trying to solve for. None of us would start a design problem without a good program or a sense of what the budget is. And yet, we're practicing here on the earth and living on the earth without really knowing our limits. And if we do know them, maybe we're not paying attention to them daily. So, these are the absolutes, man. Like, this is the amount of water we have, the amount of land we have, atmospheric carbon at its current place and what it can absorb, and of course the current population. So, you know, when we're aware of this data, then we can design to it. And I think that's the amazing thing about it being, alive today and being a designer or an architect today, is that data is close at hand, and we can define just about anything that we need to. And that's what I think is it's hugely promising. So anyway, trying to create a climate and an earth that's livable, is a global challenge that, we all have to solve from our desk, in our town, and in the part of the ecosystem that we live in, in the world. So I work for a company called Interface. We're a global designer and manufacturer of flooring systems. And we employ about 4,000 people around the globe. And we are redesigning the industrial model. Not everybody would define it that way. I'm not sure people who are making carpet would define it that way, but they know that their job is to not only make carpet, but to think about a better way to do it. And we've been intent on changing, the globe, the world from the outset. The designers of early office space or in commercial space were basically putting rolled carpet over infrastructure that was then, in the slab, which was craziness. And we knew that there was a better way to solve that problem. So we started from scratch. We've never really thought of ourselves as a carpet company. We created modular structured flooring that behaved more like furniture than paint. In other words, it was able to be moved and changed and designed and so forth. It wasn't adhered to the building. And we started in a pole barn in Georgia and built every machine. We bought some technology, but basically it was a container full of parts. And so we had to invent ourselves, design ourselves, and create something that could be commercially sold. And it's that, optimism around design, like, hey, we can do this. We don't really have a roadmap, but we objectively believe we can get this done. And that's what it's at the very core of who we are. And apparently back in the day, people wore suits in the factory. I'm not sure what's going on there. And we also cut each carpet tile by hand. I think this is probably for PR purposes. The guy on the left is Ray Anderson. He's the guy that started the company, an industrialist, a great designer, although I don't know, he would call himself that. But he could see the future and describe it vividly. He was talented, he was driven, he was courageous. And when he started Interface, he was threatened, honestly, by the worst recession in US history in the early 70s. His employer, even his ex-wife at the time, told him not to risk his future on this unproven idea. And he acknowledged all that, but he was very committed and he went forward anyway. We've had our ups and downs, but by the mid-90s, we were wildly successful by anybody's definition. His secret was to stay close to the market, listen to his customers, and always be ahead of competitors. In 1993, we were told by a customer's representative we weren't going to be considered on a job in California. And the reason was we had no environmental position, and we were obviously clueless about our business's impact on the ecologies that support us. So Ray was super angry at first. He pointed to compliance and said, what else is there? And the more he dug and the more he read and the more people that he talked to, he finally admitted we had no idea what we were talking about. And hungry for a definition of the problem he was solving, he found Paul Hawken's book, The Ecology of Commerce, which is now on the screen. And in particular, chapter 2, The Death of Birth. And basically, this was an indictment of what he had been doing for the last 20 some years. And it hit him hard, quite honestly. He went from frustration to inspiration and asked that we all globally describe a design brief for a company that did no harm to people or planet by 2020, and to be restorative behind that. It's a hell of a design brief. This is what it felt like, quite honestly. You're standing there and you know what you're solving for, but you have absolutely no way of figuring out how to get there. And if you can imagine yourself standing there in this forest, if you're in sight of picnic tables in your parked car, then everything is cool, and you're thinking about it fairly casually. But if you're 2 miles into the forest and you're at this point, then all of a sudden you start to think more like a designer. Everything is critical. You're a critical thinker. You look for resources and you try to find your way out. And so this metaphorically is something that obviously we experienced at this point in our history, but something that we've revisited over and over again about being lost in the woods and being comfortable as designers to get out. So in '94, we set a mission to eliminate any negative impact, and beyond that to be restorative. And that was a huge deal. I mean, again, we were petrochemically intensive, not only in how we made things, energy and waste, but the polymers that we used were all from petrochemicals. And so it was a huge deal. And we've come far. We've come very far. One of the disciplines we redesigned was actually how to understand whether we were being successful. Luckily for us, we did measure waste early in our history, and that transferred into our focus on sustainability. So we already had sort of invented this accounting method of understanding some of these more abstract things, because we knew that part of our success would be to influence others. And by doing that, or to do that, we would need to be transparent. And to be transparent is to reveal your success and failures. And so a lot of that is in metrics. So the task was to generate better solutions with this data, and to provide a firm grounding in kind of what is. And 28 years ago, what is was a little bit murky. I mean, we didn't know what good would look like, other than we were trying to get to zero by 2020. But the proof's in the numbers and the systems that we continue to redesign over and over again. But by 2017, it was clear that this mission that we were on just honestly wasn't good enough. Forget the numbers. This is an ecology that we can't feel good about. This is the tar sands in Canada, really not far from where I live. There was nothing here that is in balance. I think it's safe to say that what we've done here to extract a highly inefficient form of oil has done a huge harm to the ecosystem that supports this. And we need to recover even ecologies like this, because we depend on these ecologies to support and sustain us, and we must support and sustain them. And with an acknowledgement that business has the biggest agency for change, it has the biggest responsibility to be the voice of ethics. This is a quote by Bruce Mao. I don't know if any of you know him. He's actually a Canadian. He is a graphic designer by background, but again, a broad thinker and somebody who I respect, and whose perspective, if you're interested, is something you might want to look into. He's designed very holistically around the world. He put forth a design for Mecca, believe it or not. He was not allowed to go there because he's not Muslim, but he and his team were asked and did so. So he's a broad thinker, and this pretty much says it. We're at a point in history where this is the challenge, but it's also the opportunity. We're at a moment where most people understand the climate's changing, and our existence is in peril. And further, that we've changed it by accident. I don't think anybody intended to do what we've done. But regardless, and regardless of politics, there is broad conversation about how to address this, so future generations have a prosperous future. And that responsibility, opportunity, is our design brief. And that brief considers resources, social issues, and ethics. It's about business models and finance, because if the business model doesn't work, it will not happen. This is a graphic from the CDC I just want to spend a minute on. Humans are the most powerful species, certainly, that's ever walked the planet. And nothing in our natural history has had the impact that we have. So we, as I said, we didn't set out to warm the planet, but having done so, we can do so and change it for the positive. This highlights the significance of the impact of climate change on your day-to-day life, specifically your health. We don't often relate climate change with health, but the two go hand in hand. Carbon, which I'm going to focus on a little bit here, directly impacts human health, especially displaced into the atmosphere. So let's just look at this graphic for a second. The inside ring is natural disasters. We're talking about the hottest years on record, Canadian forest fires, which I saw from my back door, some of the catastrophic floods in Libya and elsewhere. I mean, these events forever change the environment, but their impacts are felt years later, and they directly impact the second ring. And these are the things that you don't hear about in the nightly news, and they're not as dramatic a story, but their impact is still massive. They're the things like increased air pollution, allergens after forest fires, contaminated water, that are, contaminated water sources after, these large storms, all of which cause problems and linger for decades. And these things don't get fixed overnight. So, what happens as a result of both of these inner rings is the outside areas. And this is where we see a threat to public health. Things like an increase in asthma cases from an increased level of air pollution and allergens. We don't think about the selection of healthy materials, for example, which is something that's germane to what you guys do for a living, as helping reduce asthma rates or the respiratory disease, but they are connected. I hope I can connect those for you today. These extreme weather conditions, happen as a result, in part, because of increased carbon in our atmosphere. We need to draw down that carbon and find new ways to reduce our carbon footprint, i.e., healthy materials specifications. So we lead a designed life. What I would say to folks is, if I were to put a blindfold on you and attempt to, pilot you to an area in the U.S. or Canada where the human impact has not been felt, it's few and far between. The externalization of human activity is difficult to do anymore. The perception that we're apart from nature, and that nature is separate is folly. The reality is the percentage of the globe that's untouched is surprisingly small. And here, in the U.S., this is shown. We think there's large areas of protected areas, but not so. Nature depends on our ability and our informed design intervention. To pretend that it can rebound these days on its own is not possible. And we need to move actively as a practice and as a civilization to do everything we can to redesign this for the better. I think this is a compelling graphic. Bruce Mao did this graphic working with Frank Gehry on a museum around biodiversity and in Panama, and it resulted in this map. It's about the practice of design and its relationship to life. And on the left, I think, is a 20th century sort of view of where design used to be. The old responsibility and the new. And in the old, design was a function of business, and business happened in a cultural context, and culture existed, in a natural environment. But now, nature, culture, and business, and even life itself are design projects. We're responsible for all life, and what we will we're going to destroy what we don't design. And I think we just need to ponder this and take this seriously. And look, we didn't intend on changing the climate. I don't believe. I don't think anybody woke up and thought about, changing the overall temperature on the globe. But we did change it. And if we change it by mistake, I think it's possible to change it with intent. And, isn't this the mindset of all of us, of all designers? We say design is an inherently optimistic medium, and that's because, there's always a better way. We come to work and we think, yesterday was good, but I'll have a new set of collaborators, and maybe there'll be some new information, and we can do a better job today than we did yesterday. And what if we took that mindset and applied it to, some of our greatest social and environmental challenges? So, designers, I think we all can say that we believe our best work is ahead of us. And we need to have that optimistic, courageous attitude to consider a plan to reverse the imbalance of the carbon cycle. Designing to the status quo, I think, is a disservice to our stakeholders, who are many. It's not just our customers and it's not just our community, but it's people we can't see, and it's the ecosystem that we rely on. There's another Bruce Mile quote, which sounds kind of funny, but I think if we really think about it, it's the truth, which is, who wants to just use the same details over and over again? Who wants to boilerplate what best cases? We want a real good challenge. I mean, I don't know that we want a customer that doesn't pay, but customers who are challenging. Some of our best customers, if you think about it, were ones that are super difficult. They challenge the heck out of us. So yeah, a bad situation is good, and a terrible situation, is inspirational. And I think we should take that and apply that to the challenge before us. So I would say amen, brother, to that. So in 2018, Interface looked at where we were, and we certainly looked at where the globe was, and we decided that getting to zero, although we were super close based on those metrics, just wasn't good enough. We were going to have to reset. And so at that point, which is near 5 years ago, we issued this document, which is not prescriptive, and it doesn't tell you exactly what to do, but it explains through these 9 themes what Interface has done as a just as a flooring manufacturer. There's no angels singing in our hallways. We're not like, we weren't created with fairy dust. We're a heavy manufacturer, but we have had some success, and so we thought we would at least write this down. And this is, I'll give you guys access to this. This is not proprietary, but there's more information than what I'm showing on the screen. But basically, it's these 9. Shoot for the moon, which basically says, set high aspiration. If you don't get there, who cares? You're not being judged against that. You're being judged against whether you're trying to do great things. A change in mindset could change everything. It's kind of what I'm talking about right now, which is if you just rethink, maybe recalibrate the way you're thinking, a whole new set of collaborators and a whole new set of solutions might come into focus. Every vision needs a plan. It basically just means you can be visionary and set some aspirational goals, but you got to have the part of the team that can wrestle it down and create strategies and action plans and measurements. Take your circular approach, super important. We can't just keep taking from the earth, making and wasting. We have to make certain that what is considered waste is food for the next cycle. To change everything, you need everybody. I mean, look around your office. I mean, if there's people that are complacent or just punching the clock, those people are the weak link, man. We got to make certain that everybody's challenged, that everybody understands they have a role, their voice is important, and be as inclusive as we can to get best possible result. A wrong turn can lead to the right result. This sounds hypothetical, but we've done this. I mean, we've done things where we've attempted to affect social change by engaging workers in Asia around traditional weaving, and we spent a couple of years working on that and created some really cool stuff. But quite honestly, it just wasn't marketable. And so, was it a failure? Yeah, I guess it was against traditional measurement. But we took what we learned there and created this program where we did provide meaningful and sustained social change around fishing villages in the Philippines, and now we've moved to Africa and so forth. But it uses the difference was we actually learned, and we got after raw materials instead of finished product. We used we employed collaborators that were in the field. We created a microeconomy for the participants so that we weren't paying them just one for waste nets, as it turns out. And the program was around waste netting, that if you're on an island, there's a little place you can put this waste fishing netting. They're all fishermen. It's basically floating and causing destruction. And so what we did was we gave them a way to aggregate that netting, get it into us. We gave it into our yarn supplier, Aquafil, and we created a cyclical process for getting our yarn back. So anyway, the point was that we learned from our first mistake and created something that's been extremely successful since. Be transparent. I talked about that. It just means, engage with other, the people who are in this room right now, this virtual room. I don't know how much you talk to each other. I don't know whether you guys hang out with and drink coffee. Many of you are competitors, but to get to a better climate and to solve some of the problems in front of us, we need to be transparent with the things that we can. Obviously, not proprietary information, but what's working, what's not. What are some tips and some tricks that are working in your studio? To get closer to maybe what you pledged towards AIA 2030. That kind of information is something we should be really transparent about and share with each other. Start a ripple, create a wave. Yeah, that's about being more popular. I'm being a little bit coy around popularity, but it's around doing good work, expressing it in the community, and getting others to see that this kind of work also is profitable. And through that, we can create influence and we can create a wave and a movement, which is what we all need. Raise the bar means just what it says. We got to 2018 and we said getting to zero is just not going to get it done. I mean, being less bad, the world needs more. And so we reset our mission. And what we did was we went back to the forest and said, what is the most difficult? What's the most pressing thing that sits before mankind? And it, of course, is climate change. And so we set our new mission to reverse climate change. Obviously, not by ourselves, and we call it climate take back. So this is our evolving plan to reverse climate change. And similar to 1994, yet again, we were standing in the forest, a little more informed and with a lot better network of smart people. And these are the 4 tenets around this. So live zero on the far or on the upper left is something that we've been focused on since 94 and are extremely close to. And we really understand that. Love carbon is what it says. Yes, we need to understand what are livable levels in the atmosphere, and we need to understand how to reuse carbon, that is, pull carbon from the atmosphere and use it as raw materials, and start using it, as a resource. Measure it and design with it. Let nature cool. That's all about nature has the ability to actually cool herself if we would just get out of the way. So, support the biosphere's ability to regulate itself and mimic her in our own, commercial way. And then finally, lead the industrial re-revolution. That's what I'm trying to do with you guys today, is to hopefully engage you to be leaders and to rethink, how we do business, how we design and make stuff and, design space and build buildings. So the tactical plan for us sort of looked like this. In 94, it was a smokestack business, more or less, make, waste around raw materials, petro-intensive chemicals, and we had a disconnected supply chain. And around 2000, we're trying to bring factories to zero, to have zero waste, and it's extremely close. Closed loop materials, low carbon products, and a more sustainable supply chain, but again, not good enough. And so the Beyond 2020 version is thinking about factories as forests. We have this program where we measure the ecosystem services of a sort of a mature ecology near our factory, and we try to understand what those metrics look like how much oxygen is cleansed and habitat and water purification. And then when we build a space or we redesign a space, we use those metrics instead of our old buildings or a competitor's building as the baseline. So using nature as a baseline for the performance metrics of the building. And as crazy as that sounds, it is doable, and we are doing it. Products from dispersed materials, using our own products that people have sent back to us, a high percentage of recycled content, designing not only the product, but the system to get it back. Super important. Products that sequester carbon, thinking about a product like a tree, basically take carbon and embed it in a product so that it's not released into the atmosphere. And then supply chains that benefit all life, try to think about not only the communities around our factories, but think about the communities that are around some of our suppliers and have them focus on that as well. I mentioned the bringing fishing nets back. That's a great example of one of our suppliers basically reinventing the nylon polymer and figuring out a way to recycle it. Chemists and scientists said it couldn't be done. Let's see if I can get this to work. So this is a NASA video, and it shows atmospheric carbon dioxide levels, shifting and changing over the course of the year. And you can see at the bottom, this is January of the year by day. And the swirling colors represent, plumes of carbon dioxide emitted from industrial, ag, and natural processes, and dark green indicating higher concentrations of greenhouse gases. And as the seasons change from winter to summer, the growth cycles of plants and trees removes carbon from the atmosphere and dramatically reduces CO2 concentration, particularly in the northern hemisphere. And this process is known as the carbon cycle. And what we're watching here is both how humans and global ecosystems both change over the planet's atmosphere year over year. The early months of the year show how human activity heating homes and running industrial processes, especially again in the northern hemisphere, where the vast majority of our global landmass and human population are, adds high concentrations of carbon dioxide into the air. But to remind us that we're not, in fact, on this planet alone, just kind of watch as we get towards summer here, because this visual right here is a little freaky, honestly. But what happens is, as we transition to the heart of summer, is that the Earth will begin to inhale. I mean, basically, drinking in huge quantities of CO2 as plant life leaves out and processes the carbon, as it grows. This is the Earth's regulation. It's homeostasis. It's working to keep the temperature and the balance of gas in the atmosphere at a level where all life can thrive. And this is the process that's made Earth so full of life for billions of years. It's called the carbon cycle. So you can see how dramatically different this is in August than it was at the outset of the year. And you'll see, again, as we head into September and into the months we're in now, as the Earth itself reduces its capacity to absorb it via photosynthesis, we end up with higher concentrations in the atmosphere. You get the point. Let's see if I get out of that. So, there's a balance here. As I speak to you, if I could see your eyes, it just would be easier. I'm not here to necessarily bum anybody out, but the data and the science says that we've got a lot of work to do. But at the same time, what's not publicized and what you don't see in the media is all the great activity that's even happening in your office. I mean, I don't know what great work is happening there in Idaho, but I'm sure there's a lot of great work going on, and we need to make certain that we're communicating that to each other. But even outside of our industry, there are villages, towns in the U.S. and certainly outside the U.S. and Canada, they're doing amazing things. And this is a quote from Paul Hawken, who actually wrote the book that I showed you earlier. And I think it's a good one, that in fact, having the data and understanding the difficulty of what lies ahead shouldn't bum us out, because there's a lot of great stuff that's going on. So in the context of climate change, we use carbon sort of as a shorthand for greenhouse gases that are contributing to warming the globe. So there certainly are other things there, but by far the largest one is carbon. And you guys didn't know you're going to be part of a science lesson today, but again, just the basics here. The carbon cycle that I referenced in that NASA video, it's important to remember for the longest time, carbon cycle has been regulated without our input or our us getting in the way. It was sequestered by plant life, cycled into food web, where it's consistently recycled into other living beings, from microbes and bacteria, eagles, lions, and bigger. Some of that carbon gets stored under the Earth's crust in form of mineral material for hundreds of millions of years. And those mineral deposits include things like, coal, petroleum, and gas. So this is what happens when you include humans. When we industrialized and modernized society, we introduced a huge new source of emissions by burning those mineral fossil deposits that were otherwise in the ground, and use them for the heat and the energy that they generate. And this additional emission source has led to the significant imbalance in the cycle, where there's much more carbon in the atmosphere than the atmosphere can or that nature can reabsorb. So we all get the science, right? So there's some good news. There are real indicators, as I've said, that business and institution are understanding and that they're acting, and that carbon and climate are in the public discourse. And I submit this as an example. Hopefully this will work.
Helping the planet for 200.
Georgia-based carpet company Interface makes carpet tiles that are not merely this element neutral, they're negative. Andrea.
What is carbon?
That's it.
So, if you're in jeopardy, man, that is, doesn't get any better than that.
Helping the planet.
Additionally, we do not, we have a PR agency, but we do not look for, we don't look for publicity for publicity's sake. We don't really submit our general work into competition. We just try to do the work, and we try to make certain that the results of that work are being shared. And we've been given a lot of airtime and awards by people like the UN, which again is super cool. And it makes us feel good. But I think the other thing it does is that it primes the pump in the marketplace. If you don't think our competitors see this, you're wrong. And if you don't think that they believe that they need to, in some way, get on their version of something similar, you're probably wrong. So I think this kind of acknowledgement about how a for-profit business can be successful is good, for the marketplace and for the climate. I'm not sure about this one, but this is a couple of months ago, we were named one of the most influential companies in Time. My mom was thrilled. I'm not certain that this has any impact on whether or not people are looking for more, low carbon specification. But I think, really any publicity around companies doing well by doing good, I think is good for all of us. So some degree of popularity, helps the cause. So there's great things happening in government procurement in the private sector that should point to opportunity for all of us, whether we're in architecture, land planning, engineering, or interior design. The entire design ecosystem. The federal government, at least in the U.S., through the Inflation Reduction Act, has published sentences that talk about things like leveraging the purchasing power of the federal government to support demand for low carbon construction. That's just crazy talk. Even 6 years ago, that would have been impossible. So, that speaks well to, yeah, we have a job to do, and clients don't always ask for this, but if the GSA is asking for this kind of stuff, then maybe, you know, some of our customers would think, in addition to get everything that they've asked for in terms of, you know, their building or their environments, that they can get some of this as well. I think that's a good thing. You know, buy clean, you know, the efforts of, you know, a growing list of state lawmakers to limit, you know, embodied carbon emissions at the federal, state, local level, corporate level, you know, should give policy observers reason to believe that buy clean proposals are only the first step towards, you know, moving towards carbon emissions in buildings and the materials that help build them. You know, this map's maybe a year old now, year and a half old. Just a year old. But legislation's pending in 10 states that's going to address embodied carbon in concrete during construction. And then from concrete, who knows? It could include ceilings, wallboard, flooring, and other things. We all know things are different in California, but, you know, this Buy Clean Act, you know, since 2016, a coalition of, you know, the Blue Green Alliance, the Sierra Club, United Steelworkers have advocated for this bill, this first bill targeting embodied carbon emissions in public infrastructure projects. And I think that it's actually become law, if I'm not mistaken. This year, lawmakers have been considering another bill that would add, you know, concrete to that list of materials. And I guarantee you that others will follow. It should not be in the way of better buildings. It should not be in the way of more of getting buildings that perform as well on budget. It'll just make them hopefully better designed. You know, there's you know, I'm not certain about Idaho specifically, but I know that there are states that find CEU requirements for architectural license renewals, and that's awesome. And you know, again, the smarter we are, I think the better designers we are, and the better the results for us and for the climate. You know, market transformation, you know, LEED, there is actually movement to create embodied carbon policy. There's I think a beta credit and code certifications around LEED and Living Building Challenge and zero carbon. All this includes accounting and reduction of embodied carbon in their systems, which again is fabulous. Not going fast enough, but you know, maybe you guys can help along those lines. Look, you know, the acknowledgement that climate change is the single biggest threat to global economic and social stability has been made by institutional investors, which I don't know much about this, but I know that these three are a big deal together. You know, they force publicly traded companies to have, you know, strategy on climate and carbon, and not all public trade. I'm sure all your customers aren't publicly traded, and there's a ton of companies that are funded by public equity. But that said, these are the biggest, and they're forcing change. So hopefully all of that comes at not at a cost, and shows again how for-profit can also be for the earth. So again, I'm not an expert here, but the biggest part of a company's carbon footprint is not energy consumption, and the fact that it's around things that they're not so familiar with, but you guys are and can help them, can give them advantages, you know, around things like proxy voting guidelines, which again, I'm not an expert in, but if these companies move in this direction, it can only be good for everyone. So, you know, their carbon footprint is not, again, not energy consumption in their buildings, or is it air travel? It's the footprint really of all the stuff that they buy throughout the year, and stuff they consume, but don't have direct control over. Things like raw materials and energy it takes to make the stuff they build, like, you know, where I play and fit out their buildings, office centers, call centers, factories. You know, supply chain emissions are 11 times larger than operational emissions. So not unlike the electricity it takes to run your offices, this can mean big things to these companies if you guys can help them find a way to reduce things in their supply chain. Larry Fink, probably at some letter is somewhat over publicized, but I will tell you that he's smiling, but he's not kidding. This guy's been on this path for a while, and he believes that decarbonizing the global economy is going to create the greatest investment opportunity of a lifetime. And he's serious. So you guys probably haven't seen this, and you probably can't see it now. It's very small type. But it's basically it's a page out of Fortune, but what it does is it shows the Fortune 500 companies and their climate targets. So talk about transparency. It basically is put them all out there, and they put their information out there. So if they're clear on their ESG strategies, and if they intend on continuing to report on it, they're going to need help to meet their commitments, and that can't be bad. And that's an opportunity for the architecture and design community. The climate pledge, seems like a scary thing to do, but as I said before, pledges are an awesome thing to do. Setting high aspiration is a great thing to do, because again, you're not going to be thought of poorly if you don't actually hit the exact number. It's making the effort that is what it's about. Yeah, and the importance of this kind of reporting and this kind of aspirational pledging gets people to pay attention. And that's what this is about. Microsoft, arguably the largest for-profit enterprise in the world, they've acknowledged their role in creating the situation we're in. And further, they've that they're going to have to lead in this effort to reverse global warming. Not only have they said that they'll be carbon negative by 2030, but by 2050, they're going to go back and remove all the carbon that they have emitted since their inception in 1975. So that's pretty cool. that is just an awesome thing to do. Whether or not they get there, I just love that as an aspirational goal. So that's Microsoft. That's the biggest company in the world. So how much impact do you guys have? How much impact do I have? This is something that was done by Design Lab, and it shows the spending power or specifying power that consumers and designers and architects have. So what we do at home matters, no doubt. What we buy, how we power our homes, so on and so forth. But the average designer has 26 as much time specification power as the average American has buying power. And if you work for one of the biggest, the giants that interior design publishes, it's 111 times more. That's craziness. So that's power, man. And that's what you guys have. So here's our specific opportunity. These are the sector emissions of CO2 into the atmosphere annually. And you can see on the right-hand side, building and operations, which is what you guys do if you're engineers and architects. And then materials and construction, it's around almost 40% of the global emissions are something we can affect as a design and a construction market. And just to get things clear, I know you guys probably already know this, and again, I can't look in your eyes, so I don't know if they're rolling back in your head at this point. But just to be clear, operational carbon obviously is all the energy it takes to run the factory, run the call center, the office, the institution, the college. Embodied carbon is all the stuff that the buildings and interiors are made from. And just to show you an example of the impact difference, based on research by Architecture 2030, between 2020 and 2030, the bigger impact for sure is in embodied carbon. The green bar is embodied carbon, and the blue bar, of course, scales, as the building gets older. But as a society, we have a job to do between now and 2030, and certainly by 2050. And embodied carbon is nearly as big for the next 30 years as operational carbon, and bigger for the next 10 years. So embodied carbon is where the action is right now. And how big? Well, new construction is said around the globe is supposed to double by 2060. So it's in areas that you wouldn't necessarily expect, in areas with codes that probably aren't as good as what exists where we practice. And all the more reason for us to change our practice and to lead by example, and create a new way of thinking about designing space. So embodied carbon, as we look at it, as Interface looks at it, we have a lot of control over that. 53% of that comes from the stuff that we use, 4% from how we do it, very little from transportation, quite honestly, 3%. And then the balance is from things that we aren't necessarily in control of. So we totally focus on that 57% and how we think about, what our materials are made of, and how we do it. That's our design brief. So in tenant improvement specifically, let's look at interiors, and structure and enclosure. Obviously, structure and enclosure are the biggest, but interiors has a significant contribution as well. And I want anybody who practices interiors to know that your contribution here is significant. And if you're a structural engineer, certainly, getting the best concrete, super important, or the best steel, super important, and that can be done today. But the interiors profession and MEP, HVAC, structural engineer, not structural, but mechanical engineers, again, a huge part in the carbon contribution of design going forward. So there's something else I want you guys to know, that there is an ability to understand this carbon knowledge. If this is new news to you, or if some of this seems difficult, there are tremendous resources and communities that are building, even in your community, that you may not know about. Carbon Leadership Forum is something that is nationwide, and they are not for profit at the University of Washington, and they rock, man. I mean, they're accumulating carbon knowledge, and this is an example of that. Basically, what they're saying is that even the detail that I showed earlier about operational carbon versus embodied carbon, that wasn't even counting cycles of renovation, like office buildings or in hospitality, where we continuously renovate after a lease or whatever it is in hospitality, 5 years. We gut the thing down to a white box or worse, and then we start over again. And you can see from the Carbon Leadership Forum, that if you start out with a design that you think about refurbishment, it can make a huge difference. One thing else about the Carbon Leadership Forum, they offer a great array of education around open carbon assessment and LCA tools, which I know seem onerous and difficult. So EPDs are what give you the window into the carbon footprint and other things of the products that you guys are specifying. Again, whether it's insulation, whether it's ceilings, flooring, structural steel, or concrete. And EPDs are something that you need to ask for. It's something that you need to work with. I think it would build the way any tight specification does. It guarantees better performance. It guarantees a lower carbon footprint, and I would argue it guarantees a better design product without compromising any of the things that are in your current specifications. So not everybody has an EPD, but you should ask for it and see what if they have something comparable. Let's take that. I know the furniture people specifically have a very difficult time because every workstation has 3 billion parts, so it's very difficult for those people. But EPDs are super important, and the equivalent is like this at home, where you get the nutrition facts on your products, and you can actually see if you have something that you're trying to identify as something that you want or you don't want, you can actually, get it from those EPDs. This bar chart, of course, I'm super proud of, but this is third-party verified. And what it shows is Interface and its competitors, and it's a proxy. Yes, I'm using this one because it's the one I have and the one I feel emotional about, and it shows on the left margin the kilograms of CO2 equivalent in square meters. So basically it's saying that the products at the far left have the lowest carbon footprint, and the spec is equal. So the price point, that it's the same gray, it's the same basic face weight, so on and so forth, performance and so forth. And you can see the interfaces on the far left that we have through our backing systems. That's our entire line. That it's lower than many of our competitors, and many of our competitors have a few here and there. But as a proxy for how different and how much better you can get with concrete or with ceilings or with furniture or really HVAC equipment, this sort of disparity happens really in all those things as well. There are companies who are designing with carbon in mind, which again shouldn't raise the cost and doesn't impact performance. And you have this at your fingertips these days. You have the ability to look at all of these important hotspots in your LCA or in your design to find the best one. This is a slide from Rocky Mountain Institute, and it shows kind of what I've been saying, which is that they did some assessment, and the cost premium for looking at EPDs and reducing carbon comes at not a premium. That in fact, 46%, for example, on the steel reinforced concrete, maybe 0.5%. So manufacturers are getting hip to the fact that they're a big part of the problem, and they have the opportunity to design better products. You have the opportunity to ask them the hard questions about showing you the facts and figures, and then further optimizing that for what your clients are trying to do. For you interior designers, and even for architects and others, this is just a graphic, an axonometric showing kind of like these are the biggest areas, hotspots, really in any assessment of an interior, of where the opportunities are. So wallboard, ceiling tiles, if there is a ceiling, flooring, insulation. These are if you just focused on these areas alone and had the team focus on trying to reduce these project over project by doing baselines or using industry baselines, huge progress could be made by the firm to meet your goals, and would be a huge benefit to customers who are trying to reach their own goals. This was a case study done in San Francisco by Gensler, and it was done a long time ago. This is before we had great data and before we had the software and tools that we've got today. But on the left was a baseline scenario, and I think it was like a 15,000 square foot. No, it was like 5,000 square foot. So it was a fairly small project, and it was mostly TI, tenant improvement. And you can see the areas on the left that had the biggest opportunity. Carpet happened to be one of them. But what they did was they longhand, they went in and found EPDs, and they did their best to get apples to apples and do the comparison. And the specs on the left were kind of their go-to people. These weren't they weren't hacks. These were like their best specifiers or their consultants' best suppliers. I'm sorry. And then on the right, what they did is they did the hard work of saying, okay, same for same specifications. Let's do the assessment of carbon footprint, keeping everything else equal. And they were able to reduce on this very small job in the categories that we've shown here, these hotspots, they were able to reduce the carbon footprint by this case study by 43%, which is huge. And then you multiply that to the number of jobs that they have, or by the number of jobs that you guys have, and you can see the amount of impact that can be made by not only folks like us who make stuff, but you who choose the best stuff and try to put it in the right place. So this is not going to be prescriptive by any imagination. I am not an expert on EC3 or on LCAs or whole building life cycle analysis. And a lot of you do this and some don't. It's kind of based on whether a customer wants it, needs it, whether you can afford it. I understand that. But there is software, Tally, One-Click, Athena, which are some are prescription, some are open source. I think Tally may be open source these days, and I think is even owned, or not owned, but it's facilitated by Carbon Leadership Forum. But you know, at the early stages of an architecture project, trying to find a lease or trying to decide whether to build a building or use repurpose a building, you know, that's where this software comes into play. When it gets down to, you know, specification, you know, the hot spots, finding those materials that have lower carbon footprint against, you know, what you desire from an aesthetic perspective and from a load perspective and all the rest, that is becoming more and more possible through a one of the programs that's open source is something called the EC3 tool. The way, you know, it can get us to in the specification process without a whole lot of heavy lifting, like Gensler did, be able to, you know, either as a spec writer or as a designer picking things, or as the architect or engineer picking things. You can actually access narrative around, you know, the most effective products around carbon. All right, let's see. And I can't move for some reason. Interesting. Hold, please. Okay, there we go. So yeah, so this is kind of what I was explaining. So there are tools today, and again, I can't go through all of them, but know that, and maybe you guys are already using some of these things, but that EC3 tool is a very effective tool. It's not global. It doesn't have every material, but it does have quite a number of hotspots, both in structure, enclosure, and in interior fit out. And again, has been built not by a manufacturer. It's not been built by academia. It's been built by folks like you guys, and maybe you've even participated at some level, not only sponsoring it, but beta testing it and so forth. But again, these are just some of the folks, and you can see the network is significant. And then actually, you know, after it was actually developed, the EC3 tool, just as a note, it was developed for a Microsoft project where they were tearing down a bunch of buildings on the campus, like over 10, and still wanted to have a low carbon footprint going forward. So they needed to understand really how to do that with a high degree of specificity, and that didn't exist. So between Skanska, who was their primary GC, Microsoft, and several other suppliers and collaborators, they developed the EC3 tool. They have subsequently handed that over to the Carbon Leadership Forum, who now facilitates it. And it is available, as I said, open source online. And it still is being supported by a diverse group of people, not only from a fiscal perspective, but also just in terms of beta testing it and trying to prove the right thing. A couple other entities that I just want to focus on here before I finish. Building Transparency, I can't say enough about those folks. It's a great resource around carbon and just building smarter. Carbon Smart Materials Palette is something that's has been in development for some time, and is a great way to get to EPDs, and a great way to maybe shortcut, you know, staring at your computer and Googling this stuff. There's also something called the Metropolis Climate Toolkit for Interior Design. I can tell you, having participated with these folks, Metropolis Magazine is serious. They're a great third-party advocate for better design, climate-focused design, low-carbon design, and has produced this toolkit. If you haven't seen it, just go to their website and noodle around. It gives you great steps for approaching how to either take what you're currently doing in practice and making it better, starting from square one, either as an individual or someone who wants to be the spark plug in your studio, or to understand who else is out there doing this that you can partner with. There is something right now around common materials forum that is taking and contextualizes all that stuff on the left, some of the certifications and all the claims and so forth, and it's trying to normalize that and create something that gives, again, you as a specifier the ability to understand within the same language what each one of those things means. So again, this should streamline in a big way where you currently are and how you're currently specifying. And then on the far right, it shows, you know, those themes around human health, climate health, ecosystem health, social health and equity, and circular economy, and how each one of these things affects it. It also, by the way, aligns with the AIA A&D materials pledge, broad buckets. So that's super cool. And for those of you in your firms who are participating in that, this should then be easy. I want to leave you with this, and that is, you know, as I said before, I work for a flooring company, and I joined in 1989, 34 years ago, to work for a company that that was trying to change the world. And we were. I mean, the world was putting, you know, grandma's carpet under you know, commercial equipment and furniture, and it was ridiculous. And so we did change the world that way. And my focus was enterprise-wide work. And then when we realized that what we were doing was really not great design, that in fact we needed to consider all life as part of our brief, then it became really fun. And then my work became that much cooler as an enterprise-wide designer. Look, we are not anything other than a company who has set, you know, high aspiration. For those of you who know us and who've visited us, as I said earlier, there are no angels singing in our hallways. This has been a long haul and a slog, because, you know, we have stockholders and we have clients, and not everybody cares. So our job is to make sure that we continue to care, and that we continue to produce great material that you guys can be proud of, and that can help you, again, as you're in your studio goals and in your customer goals, you know, contribute towards a better climate. This quote, of course, basically says, hey, if you exist, then it must be possible. And this was said by Amory Lovins, who's just a genius and is still around. He used to run Rocky Mountain Institute. He's a physicist and very funny man. But he told Ray Anderson this early, when Ray was asking how to get there. He said, don't worry about it. Just go and, you know, be that company. And if you're that company, others will follow. Okay, so before I move on, my youngest son, I mentioned my youngest son before, he pitched me and around a different car. And yeah, so I obviously couldn't deny him that. But before that, I guess I want to focus on this thing, which is, it's a carbon negative carpet tile. I put it in here only, not as advertising, but just to say that a carbon negative carpet tile was impossible. The same way that recycled nylon was impossible. But we set a vision, we got after it, and you can buy a carpet tile that reduces carbon. It's lighter on the environment than if it hadn't been made at all. It actually sequesters carbon in its backing system, and like a tree, basically sequesters carbon. So that's pretty cool. All right, back to my kid. So here's the car he got. So it is a low carbon approach. I can't fault him for that. You know, it's sustainably considered. It's low on embodied carbon. It already exists, like an existing building, right? No new carbon to make it. He had me there. Operational carbon, it's got a 6-cylinder, it's a 3-speed, it's not like a hot rod. It looks cool as hell. So it is pretty economical to drive, for sure. It's a 66 Mustang, by the way. And it's got wire hubcaps, as you can see. And then he told me that he would ride his bike when he didn't need to drive this. So I acquiesced. It's what he got. and I'm not saying now that if you in your studio begin to design with carbon in mind, and if you contribute in your community, both local and national, in a way that elevates all this effort, that you will be more popular. I can't tell you that. But this kid only had a few random dates as a freshman in his sophomore year, and then once he sort of got his head around carbon and how he could manifest that, a low carbon approach, the kid has not been without a girlfriend. So I'm not saying this is going to work for you, but it's worked for him. So I guess I challenge you to consider his case. And yeah, I challenge you to design with carbon in mind. It isn't the only thing to consider, but if you consider carbon, you'd be amazed at how all the other things fall into place. And, you know, despite all the bad things you see on your phone, we can do this. So right now is the time to design with carbon in mind, with speed and scale. So do it as fast as you can. Don't worry about the little stuff. Focus on the big stuff. Hold hands with everybody that's in the room and across the country. And yeah, Interface is not an expert. You know, we're making it up as we go too. But we do have a lot of good information, and we have a lot of access to really good people. So with that, I will stop.
Okay, thanks, Chip. That was very inspiring. I am going to.
Should I stop sharing?
Yeah, you can stop sharing, then everyone can see you.
Okay.
That's great. Okay. For all the attendees, excuse me, our Q&A function's not working, but we do have the chat open, so please drop your questions in there. And I'll go ahead and ask Chip. Okay, let's see. So there's a question regarding the use of different colors of asphalt for streets to reduce the heat factor. It says, Phoenix is painting their streets gray to lower the road surface temperature. Is there a way to have other jurisdictions get involved in this?
Well, government moves when people move, and companies move when individuals move. So yeah, absolutely. And metrics talk, right? I mean, the proof is in the metrics. So if in fact that choice of color, and hopefully, honestly, hopefully the composition is something that's recycled, that would be awesome. So not only does it have a high reflectance, but it'd be great if that pavement also came from something that was either bio-based or highly recycled. At any rate, I think, yeah, I think regardless of whether you're in Phoenix or Minneapolis, you know, reducing, you know, heat in the summertime is an issue. So yeah, the good work that was done there, if somebody can deliver the metrics, I think that's an example for anybody who's, you know, putting down paved systems.
In your presentation, you mentioned California requires 5 hours of the net zero carbon design continuing education requirements. Do you know if this presentation would satisfy that?
I don't think it will. But we do have one that will. I think there's a little bit too much romance in mine, a little too much, you know, talk of Mustangs, but Interface absolutely does, and it does exist. And it actually is, I've been through it numerous times. In fact, I've been one of them that give it. It's really good information. I mean, I feel stronger as a designer, even though I'm not doing the work of this room. I'm not, you know, I'm not really doing what you guys do. It's a good thing to do. It really is. It made me feel more empowered, you know, standing in front of suppliers. Even, you know, we had our own headquarters, and yeah, you know, there were people who didn't have EPDs, and they didn't have, they couldn't get it. You know, they were smaller suppliers or whatever. And the furniture people, God bless them, you know, didn't have them either. But it gave, you know, a better knowledge of this information gave me the confidence to say to them, then what are you doing? So if you can't get to an EPD, if that's too hard, then what effort are you making? You know what I'm saying? I mean, confidence from all of us gives us the ability to ask more of our our collaborators. Not just make them feel bad. Hopefully challenge them to like supply us with some really cool ideas or some really cool progress they're making.
Okay, do you think LEED is a critical part of doing sustainable design, or is it possible to make a difference without the effort and expense of getting a project certification?
I think that certification is expensive, no doubt. But what LEED and WELL do, for example, because we employed both of those in our headquarters when we designed it 3 or 4 years ago, there's a certain methodology that is formalized. Yeah. So no, I don't think having the certification is important, but I do think that approaching a project the way LEED describes, you would end up with a better designed building, no doubt. The truth is that, around embodied carbon, LEED is not that good. So everything I was pitching today, most of what I was pitching today will not be accomplished if you strictly follow LEED. So I would say, I'm not here to say LEED's a bad thing. It's not. It has fundamentally changed what we do. But I understand that many customers don't care and many don't want to pay. But the methodology of getting to that certification is probably something you guys have adopted anyway. There's probably a rigor around getting to LEED that a lot of studios probably do, just because it's a best way to build a building and then the interiors within.
Okay, let's see, I've got many people very appreciative of your presentation. Some people would like to have access to the slides after, so if you share those with me, I can get that download to them, or any kind of links that you think are good for them to have.
Yeah.
And everyone, also, I want to remind you, this recording will be available later today. If you log back onto Zoom the way you came in today through the and you get into the lobby, the recordings will all be available, so you can watch this again also.
Stacey, one more thing. The company does this thing called Carbon Love and Learn, which sounds super goofy. I know we are kind of goofy, but it's a 5-hour thing. It's 1 day. It's 1 day a day, 1 hour a day for 5 days, and it covers like the emotional side of this all the way down to very, very specific sort of process around carbon. And it's something we offer, and you would not believe the number of people that show up. I mean, it's crazy. I can't believe it, and I help facilitate it. But one of the most important things that I've learned in that, given that seminar, is that, or participating in that seminar, is that this is not something that it's just for architects or just for designers. Like, we've had GCs in there wanting to get hip to this, people who tear buildings apart, like demo people want to get hip to this, because they know that if they offer this in a city where demand is, they're going to be employed. Not every design firm says white box everything. Nothing works here. There are many firms who now are kind of getting hip to the fact that, maybe there's some stuff here we can use. And so the people that show up are a wide range of people, and we've created community. There's kind of an alumni thing, but there's great things happening in cities around, carbon and around climate in the community that do what I encourage, which is, to have firms hold hands on this topic, in the town you're in, just say, hey, let's get together and let's force change. Because the manufacturers like us and demo people and people who recycle furniture or recycle wallboard, nothing's going to happen without somebody creating demand. And know that you create the demand, that the market listens to the people that specify the stuff. So if you start to say, if the state of Idaho all held hands as designers and specifiers and said, this is super important to us, nothing will be specified in this state unless it has an EPD or unless it meets these requirements, I guarantee you the industry would change. I mean, it's happened in cities, where a couple of firms have basically held hands and said, not happening. We're not going to specify the stuff that has X, or we're not going to do this. And everybody pays attention. So I just want you to know, on your worst day when you're, slogging it into the office or getting on a Zoom call, you guys have huge power and huge influence over the industry, not just your client or the project, but the industry to change.
Another question, have either the Heartland Institute of Chicago or the CO2 Coalition been consulted by you or your company about any of the assertions that presume climate evolution is a product of the man-made environment?
Yeah, we have. I am not the sustainability expert. Honestly, we have a whole crew that does that. And it isn't only human influenced, but we have a fair amount of data that says that we do contribute. And as important as that, not to argue that, but as important as that, I showed the Earth at the beginning. It's only so big. And I think as much what I'm arguing for today is better design. Like, let's reuse stuff. Like, let's create a climate where, I mean, a 66 Mustang is cool because it's old, you know. I know there's a lot of vintage apartments in Manhattan that go for more than the new ones. So if we create a climate where repurposing and reusing buildings and stuff that's in buildings is cool and fashionable, well, how is that bad? Whether it's climate related or not. Like, there's only so much resource on this little globe, and we're continuing as designers to specify stuff that doesn't go back into some system where we can reuse it. And I'm making the case as much for that today as anything.